The sprawling tianguis of Mexico City stretched as far as the eye could see, a labyrinth of makeshift stalls and tents overflowing with wares. The air was thick with the aroma of street food tacos al pastor, freshly fried churros, roasted corn, and the steady hum of haggling voices. It was here, amidst the chaos, that I stumbled upon the vendor who would change my life. His stall was unassuming, tucked between a woman selling colorful rebozos and a young man hawking pirated DVDs. Yet, something about it drew me in. Maybe it was the glint of polished metal catching the sun, or the faint, sweet scent of copal incense burning nearby. The vendor himself was unremarkable, a middle-aged man with sharp features, dressed in a plain shirt and jeans, but his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. Looking for a miracle, he asked, his voice smooth as honey. I stopped, intrigued. What kind of miracle? He gestured to the small table before him, lined with hundreds of tiny metal charms, milagros. Shaped like hearts, arms, legs, and other symbols, they were traditionally offered at churches as prayers for healing or blessings. But these milagros were different. They seemed alive. Their surfaces gleamed unnaturally, and when I leaned closer, I swore I felt a faint warmth emanating from them. These aren't your ordinary charms, the vendor said, leaning in conspiratorially. Each one carries a blessing far greater than you can imagine. Choose wisely, and it will grant your deepest desire. Skeptical, I raised an eyebrow. And what's the catch? He smiled, a chilling twist of his lips. No catch, just a small price to pay. At the time, I didn't think much of it. My life was in shambles, struggling to make ends meet, drowning in debt, and stuck in a dead-end job. The idea of a miracle, no matter how improbable, was too tempting to pass up. I picked a charm shaped like a small heart. It was intricately detailed, its surface etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shift when I turned it in my hand. What do I do with it? I asked. Keep it close, he said. It will know what you need. I paid him a few pesos and left, the charm tucked into my pocket. The first miracle happened 2 days later. I had stopped at a local cafe on my way to work, and as I reached into my bag to pay, I found a crisp 500 peso note tucked inside. I didn't remember putting it there, but I chalked it up to forgetting. Later that week, I received a call from an old acquaintance offering me a lucrative freelance project, something that hadn't happened in years. It was as though my luck had turned overnight. At first, I was elated. The money from the project paid off my rent, and I even had enough left over to treat myself to a nice dinner. The charm stayed in my pocket, its warmth a constant, reassuring presence. But the miracles didn't stop. Within a month, I had landed a dream job, reconnected with estranged family members, and even met someone I was beginning to fall for. It felt too good to be true, and it was. The accident started small. A neighbor fell down the stairs and broke her leg. A colleague at work slipped on a freshly mopped floor and ended up in the hospital. Each time, I felt a strange sense of unease, like a shadow hanging over me. Then, one night, as I was walking home from the tianguis, I saw a news report on a street vendor who had died in a freak accident. A bus had lost control and veered into his stall, killing him instantly. I froze when the image flashed on the screen. It was the same man who had sold me the milagro. Desperate for answers, I returned to the market the next day. The vendor's stall was gone, replaced by a woman selling handmade soaps. When I asked her about him, she shook her head. He's been gone for weeks, she said, but you're not the first person to ask. Her words chilled me. I began researching milagros and their history, delving into archives and folklore. That's when I found stories about cursed charms, items imbued with dark energy, often tied to sacrificial rituals. These milagros didn't just grant blessings, they demanded something in return. The price wasn't money. It was life. The connection became clear. Each miracle I experienced coincided with a tragedy: my neighbor's fall, my colleague's accident, the vendor's death. The charm wasn't just granting me luck, it was taking it from others. Terrified, I decided to get rid of it. I threw it into a canal, watching as it sank into the murky water. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief, but that night I awoke to the sound of whispers. The whispers were faint at first, like wind rustling through leaves, but they grew louder, more insistent. I checked my room, my windows, even stepped out into the hallway. Nothing. When I returned to bed, the charm was on my nightstand, gleaming in the moonlight. I tried everything: burning it, burying it, even taking it to a church. Each time it found its way back to me unscathed. The blessings continued, but so did the deaths. One evening, I received a call from my mother. My cousin had been in a car accident. She didn't survive. I broke down, the weight of the charm's curse crushing me. I had to find a way to end it. I sought out a curandero, a healer known for dealing with dark forces. His small home was filled with herbs, candles, and religious icons. When I showed him the charm, his face paled. "This is no ordinary milagro," he said. "It's tied to an ancient ritual, one that requires a life for every blessing it grants. The soul of the vendor must still linger, bound to the charm. You're not just carrying a cursed object, you're carrying him." "What do?" I begged. The curandero instructed me to perform a cleansing ritual, one that involved offering my own blood to sever the charm's hold. But he warned me the charm might resist. The ritual was grueling. In the dead of night, I stood in a circle of salt, a candle flickering in front of me. I pricked my finger and let a few drops of blood fall onto the charm. As soon as the blood touched it, the room grew icy cold. The whispers returned, louder than ever, joined by the sound of footsteps pacing around the circle. Shadows danced on the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes. Then I saw him, the vendor, his face twisted in rage, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. He lunged at me, but the circle held. "You took what wasn't yours," he hissed. "Now you'll pay the price." With the last of my strength, I recited the curandero's prayer, begging for forgiveness and release. The charm began to glow, its warmth turning to searing heat. I dropped it, and it shattered on the ground, releasing a deafening scream that seemed to shake the very air around me. When the light faded, the charm was gone. So was the vendor. It's been months since that night, and my life has returned to normal. The blessings stopped, but so did the tragedies. I've learned to appreciate the small joys in life, free from the shadow of the milagro. But sometimes, late at night, I hear faint whispers, like wind rustling through leaves, and I wonder, did I truly sever the charm's hold, or is it still out there, waiting for its next victim? It happened just a couple of months ago, but the memory is still fresh, haunting me every time I sit on that couch. It was late, close to 11 p.m., and my 2-year-old daughter had a high fever. She was restless and clingy, so I was holding her in my lap as she slept fitfully, her little body warm and fragile against mine. I was downstairs in the family room, trying to focus on the TV to distract myself from the worry gnawing at me. The show playing didn't matter, I wasn't paying attention anyway. My mind was preoccupied, running through every parenting scenario imaginable. Was her fever too high? Should I call the doctor? Was there something I missed? I remember the faint hum of the television, a distant, dull sound, almost comforting in its constancy. And then, something moved. It was subtle at first, a flicker at the edge of my vision. I brushed it off as exhaustion playing tricks on me. But then it moved again, and this time it held my attention. Across from the couch, there are 2 double doors with floor-to-ceiling windows. Those doors lead out to the back deck, and at that time the shades were wide open. It was a habit of mine to keep them that way to enjoy the moonlight or the occasional breeze from the yard. But that night, the view wasn't peaceful. Something was hanging off the screen door. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a tree, maybe. But no, it was there, solid and undeniable. It hung from the screen door, swaying slightly as though it were caught in a breeze that I couldn't feel inside the house. My heart began to race as I realized this wasn't just some inanimate object. It was shaped like a man, but there was something terribly wrong about it. Its head was scrunched down into its shoulders, as if its neck had been swallowed up entirely. The silhouette was impossibly dark, as though it absorbed the light around it. And though I couldn't make out distinct features, I had the horrible feeling it was grinning at me, a cold, malevolent grin that I could feel more than see. I froze. My arms instinctively tightened around my daughter, who shifted slightly in her sleep but didn't wake. I sat there, unable to move, as the thing swung back and forth, its movements slow and deliberate, almost hypnotic. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at it. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the thing continued its unsettling sway. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it a person? A burglar? No. It couldn't be. There was something inhuman about its movements, the way it seemed to float as much as it swung. The fear became unbearable. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might wake my daughter. Finally, I summoned the courage to move. I clutched her tightly to my chest, her feverish little head resting against my shoulder, and bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I sprinted up the stairs, 2 at a time, my pulse deafening in my ears. Once I reached my bedroom, I locked the door behind me and grabbed my phone. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me 3 tries to dial my parents' number. "Hello," my dad answered, his voice groggy. "Dad, someone's outside," I whispered, trying not to wake my daughter. "On the back deck. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal." He must have heard the panic in my voice, because he didn't waste time asking questions. "Stay put. I'm on my way." Within minutes, I heard the rumble of my dad's old truck pulling into the driveway. The familiar sound was a relief, but my anxiety didn't let up. I stayed locked in the bedroom, holding my daughter and listening intently. When I heard the soft creak of the front door opening, I flinched. "Dad," I called out softly. "It's me," he answered. "I've got my shotgun. Stay where you are." I heard him move through the house, his footsteps steady but cautious. Then he opened the back door. I strained to hear anything unusual, a scuffle, a shout, anything that might indicate he'd found the intruder, but there was nothing. After what felt like an eternity, he came back upstairs. "There's no one out there," he said, though his expression was grim. I checked the whole yard, even the woods at the edge of the property. No footprints. Nothing disturbed. "Are you sure you saw someone?" "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice shaking. "It wasn't just someone. It was something." He didn't argue, but I could tell he didn't believe me. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was my exhaustion, a trick of the light combined with my sleep-deprived brain. But every time I thought about that figure, its strange, unnatural shape, and that awful grin, I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Over the next few weeks, I became hypervigilant. I kept the blinds closed at night, locked every door and window, and double-checked them before bed. I even installed security cameras around the house, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to see whatever they might capture. But nothing happened. The footage showed nothing unusual, and for a while I began to think I might have imagined the whole thing. Then, one night I was lying on the couch again, my daughter sleeping soundly in her room. The blinds were closed, and the house was dark except for the faint glow of the TV. I was starting to doze off when I heard it, a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, almost gentle, like fingernails lightly rapping against glass. My blood ran cold. The sound was coming from the double doors. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. My eyes locked on the closed blinds, half expecting them to rustle, to reveal something waiting just outside. The tapping continued, unhurried and deliberate, as though it knew I was listening. Gathering my courage, I reached for my phone and turned on the security camera feed. The live footage appeared, showing the deck and the doors. There was nothing there. The tapping stopped, and for a moment the silence was even worse. I sat there, clutching my phone, my heart racing. Then the blinds swayed slightly, as though brushed by a breeze. But there was no breeze. I didn't sleep that night. I told my parents what happened, but they chalked it up to paranoia. My dad even suggested I move the couch away from the doors, joking that it might help me relax. But I knew better. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't gone away. One day I met a neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. Hesitant to sound crazy, I asked if they'd ever noticed anything strange in the neighborhood. Her expression changed instantly. "There's a story," she said cautiously, "about a man who built a house here long ago. They say he was twisted, did horrible things to people. When he was finally caught, he cursed the land, promising he'd always be watching." She laughed nervously, brushing it off as an urban legend, but I couldn't shake the connection. My mom grew up in a small town in Mexico where everyone pretty much knew each other. I believe the population was around 350 at the time, back in the 80s. Around the time of these events, she was just 10 years old. I don't know if it runs in the family, but at some point in our lives, every single member of my family has experienced something paranormal. The first story my mom ever told me happened on an evening like any other. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the dusty streets of her little town in shades of gold and orange. My mom, Leticia, and her best friend, Ana, had been out playing in the small plaza where most of the children gathered after school. It was the safest place in town, bordered by the church on one side and a row of adobe houses on the other. But that night, safety turned out to be an illusion. At first, my mom thought Ana was trying to scare her. They were chasing each other around the plaza when Ana froze mid-step. "Letty," she whispered, pointing toward the far end of the churchyard. "Do you see that?" But when she followed her friend's gaze, her laughter died in her throat. Standing near the heavy, wrought iron gate was a woman. She was draped in a flowing black veil, her figure blending almost seamlessly with the shadows of the evening. But what caught my mom's attention wasn't the woman's eerie stillness, it was her hands. They were long, my mom told me. Too long. Like her fingers stretched further than they should, like claws. The woman didn't move, but seemed to be staring directly at them, even though her face was partially obscured. My mom and Ana backed away slowly, their small hands gripping each other tightly. They didn't scream or run, instinctively knowing that making any sudden moves might attract the woman's attention. Finally, Ana whispered, "We need to go." They turned and bolted, sprinting all the way to Anna's house. When they burst through the door, breathless and pale, Anna's grandmother looked up from her knitting. "What happened to you two?" she asked. Through gasps, they recounted what they had seen. Anna's grandmother grew serious, setting her knitting aside. "You've encountered La Mujer del Vilo," she said. The woman with the veil was a figure of local legend. According to Anna's grandmother, she was the restless spirit of a woman who had lost her children in a fire that consumed her home. Grief-stricken and unable to find peace, she now wandered the town, searching for other children to take in place of her own. The second story my mom told me happened just a few months later. Her father, my grandfather, often worked late, coming home after dark. One night, as she and her siblings were getting ready for bed, they heard the distinct sound of a horse trotting down the dirt road outside. Horses weren't unusual in their town. Many families used them for transportation. But what made this particular sound unsettling was its pace. It wasn't a normal trot. It was slow, deliberate, and heavy, as if the animal were struggling under an immense weight. Curiosity got the better of her older brother, Mario. Ignoring their mother's warning to stay away from the windows after dark, he peeked through the thin curtain. "What do you see?" my mom whispered, clutching his arm. Mario's face turned pale. "It's a horse," he said, "but there's no one riding it." Before my mom could respond, their mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of panic. "Get away from there," she hissed, pulling Mario back from the window. She quickly ushered all the children into the bedroom and made them sit together on the bed. My mom remembers her mother lighting a candle and muttering prayers under her breath, her voice trembling. Later, when they asked her what she had been so afraid of, she hesitated before answering. "Some horses carry things we're not meant to see," she finally said. It wasn't until years later that my mom learned about the legend of El Caballo Negro. According to the old stories, a black horse would appear at night, carrying the souls of those who had made deals with the devil. Its heavy, uneven gait was a sign that its burden was too great, weighed down by the sins of its passengers. The third and final story is the one that still gives me chills. My mom was helping her mother with the evening chores, sweeping the front yard while her younger siblings played nearby. The sun had just set, and the first stars were starting to peek out of the deepening twilight. From where she stood, she could see the dirt road that led out of town toward the fields. It was a quiet evening, with no one else around. But then she noticed something of faint, flickering light in the distance. At first, she thought it was a lantern. Farmers often worked late, and it wasn't uncommon to see them heading home after dark. But as the light drew closer, my mom realized it wasn't moving like a person carrying a lantern. It was erratic, darting back and forth as though it had a mind of its own. "Do you see that?" she called to her mother. Her mother looked up, squinting into the distance. When she saw the light, her expression changed instantly. "Get inside," she said firmly, abandoning the laundry she had been hanging. "What is it?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. Her mother didn't answer, only repeated, "Get inside, now." They rushed into the house, locking the doors and windows. My mom remembers her mother lighting candles and placing them in every room, murmuring prayers as she went. The light came closer, stopping just outside their gate. My mom, disobeying her mother's orders, peeked through the crack in the door. What she saw made her heart stop. The light wasn't a lantern. It was a ball of fire, floating a few feet above the ground. And though it had no face, no eyes, my mom felt it staring directly at her. Her mother must have noticed her peeking because she pulled her away from the door, her voice sharp with fear. "Don't look at it. It will know you've seen it." Later, her mother explained that the light was a bruja, a witch. These fiery apparitions were said to be the spirits of witches who traveled between worlds, searching for mischief or worse, for souls to take.